So today we are looking at arguments against the existence of God. Rather, there are those arguments that say that God is not there. And there are those arguments that helps us to prove that God is there. Either we have scriptures or not. We can use things such as we can use the environment, ecology, or something to prove that God exists without the Bible, or Quran, or Bhagavad Gita for the Hindu people. So, as you can see, the history of the philosophy of religion has largely been dominated by arguments for the existence of God. The reason is that most of the historical writers in this field have been Christian philosophers. You can think of St. Augustine and other people. You can think of Origen. All these Christian philosophers have written a lot again on arguments for the existence of God. And that may make you mistake that with a conviction that there are no other philosophers who says there is no God. So as some say there is God, there are those other philosophers, very educated people, who talk about there is no God. Now, the reason I've told you is because the Christian philosophers have done it well, and we congratulate them for that. So, however, there also exists a good number of arguments against the existence of God, and hence seeking to disapprove of God, and hence seeking to disapprove theism. Theism is the argument that God is there. Of course, atheism is believe that there is no God, yet theism is argument that there is God. These arguments may be attributed to skeptic people or sceptic people who may be either agnostics or atheists. Now, you know who are agnostics or agnosticism as a philosophy. Agnosticism as a philosophy is all about unknowingness, not being decided, not having made a stand whether God exists or God doesn't exist. In other words, you are neutral in matters to do with existence of God or the lack of it. Well, atheists are blunt. They say, we don't believe in God. Think of philosophers such as Paul Sartre. Think of the Christian backslide philosopher Nietzsche, who taught Adolf Hitler very dirty literature that probably caused the genocide, the Holocaust. You think of other people like even Karl Marx, the economics, the socio-economist genius. Karl Marx would also backslide in a sense. He was a believer. There's also skepticism. Now, in classic philosophy, skepticism refers to the teachings of the skeptikoi, which is a school of philosophers who assert nothing but just floated opinions. For them, a person should avoid postulating final truths. According to John Hick, skeptics are not concerned with the denial of the reality or existence of God. Of course, you can read John Hicks in his works. Now, they would rather explain religious experiences by adopting a naturalistic interpretation of religion. Now, two most influential naturalistic interpretations of religion include the sociological theory and the Freudian theory. the one from Sigmund Freud, the psychologist. Now, let's talk one by one these people who doubt the existence of God. Talk about agnosticism. Agnosticism. An agnostic is a person who doubts. She doubts so much that he cannot be able to say yes or no. He cannot be able to say yes or no. In other words, agnostic person is one who is not decided, as I've just noted a few minutes ago, to specific reality to which he or she thinks he cannot or she cannot know about God. So there are people who have not decided. These are agnostic people. So agnosticism comes to the fore in the realm of philosophy of religion, whereby some egoistic claim that we just cannot know about the supreme being or the supreme deity or God, and therefore they dispel any justification of believing that God exists or God does not exist. Agnosticism expresses itself through two broad perspectives, that is, uncertainty and incomprehensibility. Now, the first perspective argues that is uncertainty, that knowledge of God's existence is unattainable because no evidence could ever justify religious belief. The second perspective, or incomprehensibility of agnosticism, argues that knowledge of God's existence is unattainable because evidence of God's existence is unattainable. Okay? We can also look deeply at these two perspectives. A, the agnostic argument from uncertainty. Now, this argument tries to bring in agnosticism on the basis of doubt, or to actually identify. It tries to identify on that basis that we must doubt the existence of God. How can we be sure God exists? Agnostics, that is, that we cannot achieve certainty as the existence of God. Agnostics believe that to have certain knowledge or to be sure in religious matters, it is impossible. How can you tell God is there? Who are you to tell God is there? That is their position. Of course, I would ask, who are they to say, to doubt? Anyway, the main objection to this agnostic argument focuses on its lack of persuasiveness. Even though it may be true that we can never attain 100% certainty as to whether or not God exists, it is true on all matters. Nothing can be proved beyond all doubt. Now, this critique is mainly refuted by René Descartes, or in his treatise called Argument from Error, because he says that if we closely examine ourselves, we shall find that we have made errors in our reasoning in the past. We can therefore, on one single occasion, be certain that we are not in error again. Despite this inevitable uncertainty, we nevertheless form beliefs. Why should we not do likewise in matters of religion? So those are the uncertainty within the agnostic argument against God's existence. The other one is agnostic argument from incomprehensibility. Now, agnostics says that those who believe in God, or theists, often assert that we are unable to comprehend God, that God is so great, that He is so transcendent, that human beings in their concepts, which are derivatives of their mundane experiences, cannot totally comprehend God. The agnostics then ask, how is it possible for us to confidently reason concerning God's existence? According to this approach, when we employ our human concepts on God, when we describe Him using concepts derived from our world experiences, we must be very cautious. We must be very, very, very cautious. This is because God is neither fraud or finite. Our standard categories do not apply to Him. Now, the implication here in this agnostic argument is that God's knowledge is beyond our understanding, and so the agnostics then say that God is beyond our comprehension. Knowledge of Him is therefore, or is similarly beyond our comprehension. Of course, those are excuses. We can offer critique on agnostics' position against God's existence. Now, this type of agnosticism is countered by theistic arguments that counter it. The most significant is that of Pascal, because he does not base his argument on an appeal to evidence that God exists. Pascal's argument, an atheist now, is based on appeal to self-interest. It is our own interest to believe in God, and so it is only rational for us to do so. There are two possible outcomes of belief and unbelief. If we believe in God and it turns out to be true, then we stand to gain. If it turns out to be not true, if we do not believe in God and it turns out that He exists or God exists, then we stand to lose much. For example, punishment in hell is one of the things. But if it does not exist, we would have little or nothing to gain. These are indeed two alternatives. A, either receive an infinite reward in heaven, or 2, lose the little or nothing. B, 1, either receive infinite punishment in hell or gain little or nothing. Alternative appears a better option when the two alternatives are compared. Having said that, we can try to look at the sociological theory of religion. Now, in the sociological theory of religion, the major proponent of this theory was a French sociologist called Émile Durkheim. He held the view that society has the power to mold individuals for good or for evil. His theory, the sociological theory, suggests that the gods whom people worship are nothing other than imaginary beings, unconsciously fabricated by society as instruments whereby society exercises a lot of control over the thoughts and behavior of its individual members. According to this theory, when human beings have the experience of a higher power that transcends their personal lives and imposes its will upon them as a moral imperative, they are indeed in the presence of a greater environing reality. The reality is, however, not a supernatural being, but merely a natural fact of society. Accordingly, divinity or theism is simply the projection of the human ideals of society. Consequently, the theory by Durkheim and other sociological theorists who dispute the existence of God asserts that it is human beings who have created gods in order to preserve their own social existence. As a critic, we may argue in critiquing this that those critical of the sociological theory argue that often human beings are propelled by their conscience to act in favor of people totally outside the boundaries of any empirical society and acknowledges a moral relationship in a form of brotherhood of all men and women. They also cite the moral creativity of the prophetic mind. Prophets like Hosea, Amos, Nathan, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, Martin Luther King, and many others are innovators who went beyond the ethical code of their inclusive societies, acknowledging new and for-reading claims of morality upon their lives. Now, their mission and vision goes beyond their individual societies in the way they intend upon their own preservation and enhancement. So, in other words, these people I've mentioned, they have gone far beyond and above their own individual societies in order to move towards a higher truth. Now, in conclusion, we can say that this theory fails to explain the socially detaching power of conscience when an individual may differ with the principles of his or her group. The prophet cannot have the support of God against his or her society if God is simply society in disguise. Okay. Now, coming to the Freudian theory of religion, we argue that this theory by this psychologist, Sigmund Freud, a gentleman from Vienna, Austria, commonly recognized as the founder of psychoanalysis and who was also a student of philosophy of religion. He considered religious beliefs as illusions, ni kama kuota tu. And he saw religious beliefs as fulfillments of the oldest order, strongest and most insistent wishes of humankind. He viewed religion as a mental defense against the threatening aspects of nature, such as earthquakes, floods, storms, the vagaries of nature, and the inevitability of death. So he thought when people fear death, they're going to create religion as comfort. Just like Marx would say in another way, Sigmund Freud says more or less the same. Of course, the student Carl Jung would come and trash his own teacher and tell him, my teacher, you are wrong. There is religion, it has power, it is useful. Consequently, religion becomes the universal obsession. That is neurosis. It is the neurosis of humanity, which may be abandoned when human beings learn to face the world, relying no longer upon illusions, but upon scientifically authenticated knowledge. Freud likens religion to the childish fantasy that our parents ran the universe for our benefit, a fantasy from which the mature individuals must free themselves in order to attain whatever measure of stoic resignation they are capable of. Now, consequently, Sigmund Freud takes religion not only as a projection of human order, but also as forming the ultimately true vindication of that order. So in other words, this man is harmful to religion and he fights it using his own psychological background, that background of psychology. He uses it to really attack religion, just as Karl Marx did. Now, coming down to the problems of evil, I want to say that the strongest argument against the existence of God is rooted in the context of the presence of evil and so much suffering in the world. Many people beg the question, if there exists a God who is loving, caring, and original creator, why would he allow so much evil and suffering to engulf the world? Can an omnipotent and perfectly loving God allow suffering and pain to continually ravage his creation? What is evil? Of course, that is another question then. Evil referring to all that which oppresses humanity. It can be physical pain, it can be mental suffering, or even moral wickedness, as John Hick would actually remind us. Now, most people would agree that the first two are caused by the third one. Now, if we think of such evils as poverty, injustice, inequality, war, persecution, etc., these arise from individuals and the social environment in human history. Other evils arise from natural calamities such as earthquakes, floods, fires, volcanic eruption as it happened the other day in DRC, tsunamis, landslides, droughts, famines, and so on and so forth. Of course, these are not directly caused by human beings, although some could be linked to man's or human beings' activities, like the challenge of the ozone layer when President George Bush refused to sign the Kyoto Protocol in 2000. In other words, he did not want to stop the American businessmen from releasing a lot of carbon monoxide that may hurt the ozone layer and therefore affect all of us. He couldn't, because he found the capitalists will suffer more if we do the right thing and preserve the environment. So in a sense, we also cause all these challenges. Now, Christians, though on evil and suffering, we can look at Christians, evil and suffering. Now, Christian philosophers always considered moral evil in relation to human freedom and responsibility. A human being is created with freedom, relatively free and self-directing agent. A person who is responsible for one's own decisions. Now, this freedom gives one the responsibility over his or her good or bad actions. This distinguishes him from other animals. A lot of suffering and evil comes out of the misuse of freedom. So that is the far we can go for now. Any comments for now?